Здравейте, драги зрители! Coming off of the heels of delighting in a creation wrought from aspects of the lore, today I'd like to put forward a different kind of video, the objective of which can be considered on the most opposite end of the last, namely appreciating an excavated treasure for what it is. And what deserves some more appreciation is, in this rat's opinion, Warhammer 40k's best character, second only to the Emperor, Lufgt Huron, the Tyrant of Badab. Specifically, Lufgt Huron, not Huron Blackheart, as the Overlord of the Maelstrom can be considered an entirely separate subject to what we'll be going through today. But he will be given his due as the capstone of this near-perfect tale of man to monster. Of course, one can't simply discuss the ignoble hero of the Maelstrom-adjacent extraction zone without also including the brothers that helped him achieve that status. Thus, in this video we will also touch upon the Astral Claws chapter. They will be where we begin. The chapter can trace its origins back roughly 5,000 years after the Great Crusade, in the middle of the 35th millennium. However, the origin of their bloodline remains a mystery. Being part of the 10th founding, they and the other Space Marine chapters created alongside them helped end a near 1,000-year-long period, during which time the Imperium and the Adeptus Mechanicus had split in half due to massive civil wars. Upon mending said rifts, the Astral Claws would continue their illustrious service throughout the galaxy, including serving as guardians around the Eye of Terror during Abaddon's 5th Tantrum. By the 41st millennium, their accolades were so impressive that their record rivaled that of the first founding chapters, if not some of the legions, achieving such immense successes that earned them the highest of honors, having their chapter standard be immortalized within the Imperial Palace on Holy Terra, as well as being granted the privilege of siring a new successor chapter, a feat matched by few other Astartes, not just once, but thrice. As such, it is no wonder that they were chosen to lead the Maelstrom Warders, an aegis of 4 chapters ordained to protect the immense extraction zone bordering the second largest warp tear known in the galaxy at the time. While some may have seen it as demeaning to have to guard what was a sector of space autonomous of the Imperium itself, existing in its decrepit periphery, constantly under threat from the horrors and mongrels lurking in the cosmic wound that neighbored it, the vast quantities of riches it produced were necessary to feed the ever-hungering Empire, and could not be allowed to fall in the hands of pirates and worse. Hence, the Warders set about the task of cleansing the threats to the Emperor's distant domain. A task they apparently tended to with too much proficiency. Not long after their appointment, the aegis against the Maelstrom would be broken by the High Lords of Terra, tearing a large portion of their attached Imperial Navy elements and one of the original 4 chapters, the Charnel Guard, one of the pillars of the Pentarchy of Blood, which may be covered here at a later time, away from the Warders and sent out on assignments elsewhere in the galaxy. Regardless of how effective, the sheer vastness of the extraction zone made it impossible for just 3 chapters and a small contingent of navy to properly protect. With a few pen strokes, the Warders' structure was so destabilized that the Astral Claws' own seat of power, the Badab sector, was invaded up to its heart system by a piratical orc Waaagh. Once the Claws assembled in force, it was not that hard to halt the Greenskins' advance, but reversing it is where difficulty began to rear its ugly head. Clearly needing to perform some heavy-duty gardening, the Astartes pursued the Xenos into the Maelstrom itself and to their asteroid lair, intending to decapitate their leadership. Regrettably, the operation would result in tragedy and the chapter's near extinction at the hands of the Orcs, whose war boss slew the Astral Claws' chapter master at the time, caving his chest with his boot. But in the darkest of moments is when light shines brightest. Amidst the catastrophe, one man would rise to the challenge, organizing a successful retreat aboard their last battle barge and saving his chapter. Captain of the 3rd Company, unanimously elected to be the new chapter master of the Astral Claws by his surviving brothers, Lufgt Huron. If we didn't know what happened later on, one would not be wrong to think that he was a gift provided by the Emperor himself. He basically had all that could be wanted of a Space Marine. A warrior of peerless skill, a leader and diplomat of quick wit and inexhaustible charisma, a collected, precise, and dedicated tactician, strategist, and logistician that could be the envy of the Ultramarines, and, as he was about to prove shortly after his rapid ascension to masterhood, a prudent and cunning statesman. Having such a brazen alien assault come to their doorstep made the Lords of Badab think of their protectors as impotent and unable to properly fulfill said duty or enforce further compliance. That perceived weakness provoked them to rebel. Unfortunately for them, Huron and his brothers gladly showed them the precise prowess of the Astartes by clearing out the entire nobility, root and stem, and fully taking over the lordship of the sector personally, thus gaining the chapter master his second most infamous title, the Tyrant of Badab. Despite the implications of the word, his ascension was among the best things to happen to the people now placed under his direct supervision. Huron's predecessor had petitioned for additional reinforcements to be sent to the Warders, but given their new home's status as a mere backwater on the fringes of Imperial civilization, his pleas fell on deaf ears. A tradition that continued on after his passing, and one that his successor would not allow to result in any similar failures like the Orkoid invasion. Instead of merely destroying any pirates they could catch up to, the Astral Claws would actively seek to capture their ships, adding them in supplement to their navy forces. Additionally, as the new master of the Badab sector, Huron would begin the raising of a personal army of mortals, the Tyrant's Legion. These expanded forces would be able to patrol and garrison the extraction zone's vast expanse, freeing all of the Warders chapters to actively hunt down enemy threats, fulfilling the Tyrant's plan of creating an area of dead space that would limit the effective reach of any pirates or invaders trying to breach into the zone, then periodically diving into the boundaries of the Maelstrom's own space in order to prune any rising ingrates before they could grow into a genuine problem. And like that, Lufgt Huron achieved what some may have considered infeasible and tamed the Warp Rift's border, a feat he would seek to recreate on a greater scale. Thanks to the efforts of the additional forces created by the new Tyrant's efforts, the Astral Claws were liberated to participate in a crusade of cleansing of the Maelstrom space itself, alongside the chapters of the Black Templars and Firehawks, the latter of which is chapter master, Stibor Lazarek, would become rather butthurt that his seniority lost to Lufgt Huron's competence and charisma when it came to the decision of who to be named overall commander of the Crusade's effort. Stoking his angst even further was the fact that under the younger chapter master's leadership, the Crusade performed exceptionally well. So much so that it gave Huron the vision of not simply cleansing the space around the Maelstrom, but actually claiming it as well. At the Crusade's conclusion and the other participating chapters' extraction from the theater, Luft would devise plans on how to fully overcome any remaining nuisances, colonize the habitable plots of space, adding an unquantifiable volume of untapped resources into the Imperium's hands, and containing the Warp Rift almost as tightly as the Eye of Terror. All that was needed to achieve this ambition was the assignment of a couple more chapters and navy elements to the Warder's strength. Practically nothing in terms of cost when compared to the possible rewards of the endeavor. A pitch which would be developed, laid out, revised, perfected, and repeatedly forwarded to the High Lords of Terra's purview, only to always be dismissed and discarded before the diplomats the Tyrant had dispatched could even open their presentations. Doubtlessly, the exalted elders that have helmed humanity's leadership across the millennia must have foreseen this to be a clearly unachievable delusion, brought on by a foolish young upstart, even if an Astartes, blind to some important detail that would render the whole thing a disaster. Easy thing to think. Just like the higher powers of the Imperium would want one to do. However, the reality of the matter is likely significantly more petty, when taking into account what was likely the first seed of the Astral Claws and their chapter master's downfall: camaraderie and brotherhood. Before embarking on their venture in the Maelstrom, something did indeed break through the defense erected at the extraction zone's border and penetrated deep into the Warder's domain. A colossal space hulk, an amalgamation of hundreds or more ships lost in the warp, the tides of which smashed them all together, known by the name the Unhallowed Heart. Spat out in the face of those trying to contain the rift, the behemoth amalgamation of metal and rock would rend a bloody gash through their space. Not so much due to harboring any special crew, but because of what it was. Every single molecule of its hull was so drenched in the energies of chaos that its mere presence caused bloody madness to spread among mortal minds, and even those of space marines, to the point where they would take each other's lives, or simply their own. Its existence was such a calamity that even the Inquisition turned its gaze to the forgotten reaches of the extraction zone in order to find a way to dispose of it. It was only stopped by another of the Warder's chapters, the Lamenters, the sons of the angel Sanguinius, apparently cursed to bear the universe's bad fortune. For whatever reason, it was discovered that the warriors of the blood and their crews exhibited significant resistance to the Unhallowed Heart's foul influence. Thus, before it could fully drown a hive world's population in their own blood, with the added long-range fire of their fellow warders, the Lamenters were able to approach the beast close enough and even board it in order to obliterate it in its entirety. Resistant, but certainly not immune, they still suffered great losses. At first, it seemed like this was a turn for their fortune. Able to stop the cursed thing, somehow being blessed with the strength to withstand its malefic influence, and gaining the love, loyalty, and admiration of their brother chapters of the Astral Claws and the Mantis Warriors. Unfortunately, that would only be the tip of Tzeentch's favored weapon, hope. For while they thought themselves blessed by the Emperor, his most holy Inquisition saw their resistance to the taint of chaos as a sign that the chapter was already corrupted by it in some way. Frankly absurd, but not fully incorrect train of thought for the Ordos to harbor. This was not the first time in which such presumptions were made, but the number in which they were unfounded was not impressive whatsoever. Hearing of this incensed Lufgt Huron, and he did the most reasonable thing one in his position could do. He stood up for and defended his malign brothers in the Lamenters, by the side of whom he had fought and bled, without whom countless worlds could have fallen prey to the Unhallowed Heart. And that act of loyalty was to be his arguably greatest mistake. Because the Inquisition really does not tolerate cats, regardless of how big, bearing their claws against them. A lesson they would also impart over 300 years later to the Celestial Lions, by nearly driving them to extinction. No matter the demands of their station, small men hate being reminded of their stature by someone standing up to them. Without a shred of doubt in my mind, the century-long stonewalling Huron's ambitions would face in the High Lord's court must have been the result of Inquisitorial meddling. They likely got their practice on how to systematically destroy the Lions in the future by the next wound they sought to inflict upon the tyrant and his kin, in the face of the Tiger Claws, one of the Astral Claws' successor chapters, who was believed to be lost in the warp, but resurfaced in the time of Huron's reign. Diminished in number, upon getting their bearings from returning to the material plane, the Tiger Claws would dispatch envoys to Terra, with the request for their tithed reserve of gene seed to be opened for the chapter to replenish its numbers. None of those envoys would ever be heard from again. Not long after, further attrition would begin to plague them, until they were left with no other option but to seek out their parent chapter and plead for their aid. It has never been confirmed, but the glove fits so well that it is hard not to believe that the Inquisition sought their extinction. A goal believed to be achieved, since Luft absorbed the Tiger Claws into the Astral Claws themselves as a way of protecting them from further predation. His paternal love for his brethren leading to him breaking the tenets of the big space book regarding chapter numbers. Many would rise to accuse him of heresy for disregarding the Codex Astartes, but their fingers do not point to others that have done so. A prime example being the Space Wolves, who field great companies that swell them beyond the allotted 1,000 battle brothers, or the bloodlines of Rogel Dorn, who hold Guilliman's writing in contempt, especially the fan-favorite Black Templars, who at this point would be more aptly identified as a legion than a mere chapter when it comes to their numbers. But Ab's Tyrant gets singled out in this instance for two main reasons: not belonging to a first founding chapter, and not bending over to the Inquisition's predations. In retaliation to this mistreatment, and also likely to help support the added number of brothers, Huron would cease providing the tithes of materiel and gene seed to the Imperium and Mechanicus respectively. Desperate to avoid a sanction and preserve their own coffers, the lords of the Imperial Sector Carthago, responsible for the transfer of the extraction zones' goods to the Greater Imperium, banded with the Firehawks, who craved to avenge their egos in an attempt to claim the owed tithes by force. Instead, Jagatai Khan's descendants, the Mantis Warriors, would further humiliate Stibor Lazarek and his men, while the Astral Claws obliterated the Mortals' trifling fleets, bringing swift victory to what was a minor internal border conflict. At least, that is how it should have proceeded, were it not for the Inquisitorial triumvirate that arrived at the scene just then, and demanded for the warders to fully surrender themselves. Taming the Maelstrom Zone became the second most impossible thing in that instant, outshone by the expectation that conflict would not arise over such a gross breach of Astari's autonomy. Knowing how they act in such cases, it is not beyond the pale to presume that sparking what would cascade into the Badab War proper was at least partially the Inquisition's intention. Lufgt Huron attempted to resolve the matter amicably by calling for a parley with the loyalist side of the conflict's overall commander, Varant Ortis of the Red Scorpions, on neutral ground. Negotiations were turbulent, but could have broken through if the effort was not squandered by the surprise attack of a third party aboard 2 Chaos vessels, which resulted in both the chapter masters of the Red Scorpions and Mantis Warriors perishing in the confused fighting. To this day, said mysterious assailants remain unidentified, but given what we've gone over thus far, we can make a very good educated guess by answering the question, who did that benefit most? While definitely not the brightest stars in the sky, even random pirates would know that, while slaughtering the commanders of 2 warring enemy factions would be a great brag, giving them a third enemy to unify against would be an awful idea. Possibly the most accepted version of events is that the attack was organized by the Tyrant himself, with the intention of both decapitating the Loyalist leadership and getting rid of Yarvan Sartak, the Mantis Warriors' chapter master, because he was becoming less cooperative. A sound idea for those seeking the Astral Claws' end, especially how the secessionist fleets were bolstered by ships captured from such piratical elements. But in practice, such a risky gambit would have been a great misstep on both of the proposed fronts for its reasoning. Definitely not something someone of Luft's cunning and wisdom would consider, further enhanced by how genuine he was during the negotiations. Now, someone who wanted one of the two sides extinguished, who was dissatisfied with Varant Ortis daring to go against orders and not only consider, but allow the request for parley to take place, and who had ample enough resources to procure such ships if they so wished. It certainly leads the mind to wonder. From this final nail in the coffin, the war for Badab became a self-fulfilling prophecy. No matter how competent, the Astral Claws simply lacked the raw numbers and resources to properly stand against the juggernaut that was the Imperial war machine. And when pressed into a corner, even the most base of creatures would turn to any opportunity to survive. Thus did the Tyrant and his brothers spiral down the road of damnation, forsaking honor for cruel efficiency, thieving the gene seed of both their allies and enemies, conducting experiments upon it to speed up the process of creating more Marines from inferior mutated stock as their reserves depleted, culminating in rejecting the very emperor they had sworn to serve and breaking apart for the hope of life. All the while, their few allies were dismantled until their united enemies obliterated their seat on Badab Primaris, and with a final meltablast, Lufgt Huron, the man who would tame the Maelstrom, was killed in his final stand. While his body survived and was reborn into the monster Huron Blackheart, who proved his ambition correct by achieving it, now unshackled from the ungrateful Imperium, the Emperor's finest warrior, the man Lufgt Huron, was dead. A sin for which mankind would continue to pay for many years to come. As a conclusion of this video, I wanted to speculate with you about the first mystery referenced at the beginning. the Astral Clause's heritage. Something that can be deduced quite simply by process of elimination. Even if we include the traitor legions in the mix, since all legions had traitors and loyalists survive the ordeal of the Horus Heresy and the Scouring. Upon reviewing their genetic disposition, the Astral Clause's gene seed is astonishingly pure, with no deviations or faults resulting in malfunctioning or missing organs or overall degeneration of the warriors. Through this one observation, the number of potential sources of their blood is narrowed down from 18 to 5. Given how they lack a penchant for brutality on an industrialized level, lack a bizarrely high love of machines, and have no knowledge of the Fallen, or the secrets relating to them, the Iron Warriors, Iron Hands, and Dark Angels can also be excluded, leaving just 2 options: the Ultramarines and the Sons of Horus. 2 legions famed for fairly similar traits. In this rat's opinion, however, the Astral Clause lean closer to being the sires of the Arch-Traitor, because in them one can find a drive, an ambition, and a keener ferocity in battle that Guilliman's blood does not exhibit, unlike his elder brother. Though, in fairness, both cases result in a story that is quite hilarious. On one hand, you have the Imperium's savior from the dark times without the Emperor's light being responsible for what is growing to be the Empire's greatest adversary's birth, supplanting the failed traitors like his father did during the heresy. On the other, a rhyming of history, what could have likely been the last glimmer of Horus's great nobility once again falling from grace, except in a far better narrative manner than petty jealousy mixed with the machinations of a walking and talking personification of human filth. Fuck Erebus. Having inherited more of his father's splendor and growing to surpass his older brother in their war for revenge against the Imperium that betrayed them. A statement only really accurate for the younger of the two. Before you bring it up, yes, Abaddon at present has the greater force under his thrall, but he has been building it up over the course of 10 millennia. In a little over 100 years, Huron has managed to subdue and amass a force, without himself succumbing to Chaos's influence, so potent that necessitated for Mr. the Armless to actively try to get him on his side. If things continue in the same vein they have thus far, I wouldn't be surprised if the Black Heart dons the title of War Master in the near future, after prying Draknien from Retconbadon's cold, dead hands. But I suppose the true challenge lies in determining which of the 2 possibilities is funnier than the other. Admittedly, Roboute Guilliman is far from my favorite, but given how much I enjoy his depression after he woke up, I can give him credit for at least one thing. If all of the information about the Badab War was not erased from all Imperial records, and he learned how one of the biggest thorns in his side, namely the Red Corsairs, came into being, I'm certain that shortly after, the Inquisition's numbers would take a steep decline. Well, this was definitely something different than the norm for the channel, though in a sense still keeping with it. While a die-hard Imperial fan, it has been quite strange to see that a lot of my most favorite things end up being things that oppose the Emperor's influence, a fact revealed in the process of working on the videos made so far. I am very curious to learn your thoughts on whether you would prefer for me to dig nice things out and present them for what they are, more often than the stories themselves. It would be my pleasure to read your comments on the matter, along with any other suggestions of what else you would like to see explored. Let me know how enjoyable this, honestly, fluff piece on the Tyrant of Badab was by smashing the like button. And if you wish to keep up with future uploads, do subscribe, it would be greatly appreciated. Until our next meeting, I wish you a lovely rest of your day. Do viždane.